The favorite part of every time I do budget and finance, the favorite part of me is every time I hit this gavel, our lovely director jumps about 3 feet off her chair, so it makes me laugh every time. So, welcome everybody. This is a joint committee meeting of Budget and Finance, Public Facilities, Transportation Infrastructure, and East Bank Stadium Committee. We have, I am Chair Budget and Finance, Chair Lady Hurt, Public Facilities, Chair Pulley of Transportation, and Councilmember Mendez, East Bank Stadium Committee. So I appreciate everybody coming out. Again, it's the stadium project financing discussion, and we are joined here by a lot of folks that know a lot about this stadium discussion and the stadium project and all the financing. And so Finance Director, I should say, Kelly Flannery is with us, and she is going to lead the discussion, and I'm going to let Ms. Flannery take it over.
Thank you, Chairman Roten, as well as Chairman Hurt, Pulley, and Mendez. I feel like maybe we're setting a record for the largest joint committee meeting, so that's pretty exciting. I guess before we begin, I guess I'll check with you, Chair. We did circulate the deck in advance, so if it's the will of this body, I'd like to just walk through it once and do Q&A at the end, if that works.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Cast of characters. So some of this group you've met before, I think similar to a couple weeks ago when we had the legal team here. You're going to recognize very quickly we have experts in the space. And so I would ask that you use the time not just to ask about the merits of this transaction, but how it compares and contrasts to other stadium and arena financings. We really do have the experts on the topic here, so please take advantage of it. And somewhere in this room are all the following people. Steve Johnson from Hilltop, he is both Metro and the Sports Authority's finance advisor. Jeff Oldham with Bass Berry is bond counsel to both Metro and the Sports Authority. Inner Circle's not with us today, but you've met them prior. They were really helpful in the drafting of the agreements and what are the standards which we should ask for and received in the documents. New to today's conversation, to my right here is Ben Wrigley, and he's with CSL International. He'll speak about what his job is. Didn't know it existed until I started this process, but his sole function in life is he does feasibility work related around stadiums and arenas, and works with teams and municipalities and kind of validating revenue assumptions, building case, making sure there's need for the proposal. And he'll walk through that presentation. To my immediate right is Erin Talkington with RCL Co. Another job I didn't know existed. She works primarily, I think we quantified it like 60% of your job is related specifically to real estate around stadiums. So again, expert in that field. And then to my immediate left is Jeff Scruggs, who is managing director and head of public finance at Goldman Sachs. And joining us at the planning table, which we'll call the financing table today, we have Stacy Sonnenberg, who is managing director and the global head of stadium and arena financing at Goldman Sachs. And joined with her is Matt Webb, who is the numbers guy. Is there a question?
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, all of these folks are contracted to represent Metro or the Sports Authority in this transaction. They're not hired to represent the Titans. Is that correct?
That's correct. And not to call out Goldman, but they're not officially on the transaction until there's a transaction to approve. So they're on the come until otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
And as I mentioned, we did share this deck, and we've been through this several times. I just wanted to walk through kind of what everyone's role in this presentation is and what we're trying to achieve. As I mentioned, Ben will build the case around why Nashville can support a dome stadium and the work he's done and how it compares to other municipalities and other entities. Well, then I'll speak to the benefits of building the enclosed stadium. Nothing new here. I will share what we've been reviewing for the last 6 or 8 months. Aaron will talk about why the stadium is a piece of the larger East Bank project makes sense. And I should have mentioned in Aaron's introduction, she's not participating just solely in the stadium discussion. She's been working with planning as it relates to the entire East Bank vision. And then Mr. Scruggs will speak to the taxpayers' protection and the allocation of excess revenues. And I should note, for the allocation of excess revenues as well as taxpayers, there were several questions in the Q&A about the backstop and how the flow of funds work. So hopefully you reviewed the presentation in advance, and you'll see in the appendix. We won't go into it unless you want to, but there is detailed, just kind of reminders on how both of those things operate. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben. You don't have to push anything, it just goes.
Okay. Thanks, Kelly. So I think that, as Kelly mentioned, I think it would be beneficial to describe a little bit about CSL and who we are. We're a business planning advisory group that specializes in market financial evaluations, and it is for new or redeveloped, in this case, a stadium, but it's also arenas, ballparks, amphitheaters, attractions, convention centers, and any other public assembly facilities that you could really probably think of today. We have offices in Frisco, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and London. So our services include market feasibility, stadium business planning, naming rights, sponsorship valuations, facility design criteria, and economic impact analysis. What's relevant for today is that we've done over 2,000 studies, but I think it's more pertinent that we've worked with 31 of the 32 NFL teams over the years and have executed in some form or fashion a new stadium study for the Buffalo Bills, the Los Angeles Rams, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Minnesota Vikings, San Francisco 49ers, Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants, Arizona Cardinals, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Houston Texans. Taking all of that into context, the way that we approached this and looked at calculating out these revenues and ultimately the taxes is that for us, it's a review of local market conditions. How do they compare with other NFL markets with new stadiums? Comparable stadium benchmarking, the key characteristics that you'd find in terms of building program pricing, utilization, the competitive analysis, what in the market is also out there seeking dollars from potential fans, and then a validation of some of the assumptions that are there. Historical operations, the context as that's directly related to tax generation, market penetrations, which I'll show on this slide here, some further benchmarking, analysis of the ancillary revenues, that's the food and beverage, the merchandise, and then the parking, and then ultimately the live music and other third-party events that all gets fed into a model, which ultimately helps us look at the projected revenues that ultimately help calculate the taxes. So on the slide you have in front of you is, from our perspective, the first thing we really needed to do is validate what this stadium's going to look like. Does it have the right capacity, the right number of suites, and the correct number of club or loge seats? So when we looked at this and we take into account the market penetrations that basically take peer markets in the NFL and then adjust those for the market size, Nashville can support a stadium that is 60 to 65,000 seats in total capacity, 113 to 120 luxury suites, and 8,400 to 8,700 club seats. Basically, what's running through the assumptions right now is a stadium that's designed for 60,000, a stadium that would have approximately 120 suites, and then 7,107 club seats. So right there, you can see that everything fits. Everything in the way that the stadium is working is going to work within the initial parameters that we can find that are there. Taking another look at the entire market of Nashville, There's 6 club seats for every corporation in Nashville, and there's 8.6 corporations for every suite that's available to be sold in the market. You rank that inside the NFL, and what you find is that both of those metrics would rank as the 16th least saturated market in the NFL. Another good sign for us that we're not overbuilding, we're right-sizing a stadium for the market. And that's the way we kind of have come away with then building off of that in terms of what we feed into the model. So we like where we are in terms of the size. We feel it's appropriate. And obviously there's benefits for having the roof. Kelly, if you want to go to the next slide. What we're then doing is after we've looked at basically what the program of the building is, we started to then go out and we've built the annual schedule of events that are outside of 10 Titans home games. So what we've done is we've looked at the historical operations as well as benchmark this against new stadiums and what they've seen in that transition, whether that's going from open air to a roof or going from a roof to a roof. And then we've taken this all into account, looking at Nashville, again, as an entertainment market. Why is it an entertainment market? Right now, it currently has the 10th most stadium concerts. It's the 36th largest U.S. market. It has the second most stadium concerts per capita. It has the second most concerts per capita, and it's certainly probably all the where it has the most country music concerts per capita. Our schedule, 38 events, 38, I should say, third-party events, 48 total events. As you can see on the screen, 2 college football, 2 soccer, 16 concerts. Now that 16 concerts assumes the CMAs, which, again, are already happening, takes into account the idea that we would be looking at 6 additional nights based on what we're doing currently in the building. And that's probably coming from potentially new acts or acts that will tour and will add a date or two to Nashville, given that it's a destination market. And then I would say the third is the potential, and this is probably one market, maybe Las Vegas being the other, where you could actually have a stadium residency. And you could find an act that would play regularly in that facility multiple times throughout the year, again, capitalizing on the tourism. There's 3 dirt shows, major non-recurring event, and then there's high school, religious, speakers, other events, and other sports. And I would say that what you see on the screen, and you can notice, is that the fixed roof plays a significant role in the increase, and it's really no different than what you see up there between Las Vegas, Minneapolis, and Atlanta.
Anytime we do any financing in the finance department, but in Metro holistically, we always try and set some guardrails for ourselves, and this project was obviously no different. The biggest priority, of course, was to meet the $760 million funding commitment that was approved in the term sheet. And part of that was, how do we do that with leveraging the existing stadium and as much revenue-only debt as possible through the revenue and the predictability of revenue. And what we'll see in the subsequent slides is how we validated and stress test those. We heard a lot from this council, and I'm a pretty big advocate for it as well, to minimize the non-tax revenue pledge, or more commonly the backstop. And as I mentioned, the history and what that actually is in the appendix as well. But the other really important thing as the Metro Finance Director is I don't have the luxury of looking at just one project at a time. We have to look at what all of the future needs of Metro are going to be. So how do we maintain the credit quality and minimize interest risk while still executing on this transaction? And we heard a lot from this body about the priority for, while we know the revenues can only be for this project and related infrastructure, is there opportunity to retire debt early? We heard that. It was really helpful. It was a change from the term sheet to current. I'm happy to report, and we'll see it again in subsequent slides, that we were able to incorporate that into the model. So a really quick just bring down of where we are versus where we were versus where we are, and not a lot of change. What we approved in December of 22 to current, team is still at $840 million plus any overages. Sports Authority at $760 and the state for $500. There is no change in the revenue sources. We'll see in the financing plan, the subsequent slides. While the term sheet provided the authority to go to 2033, we expect to terminate in 2027. It's a pretty important note that when the existing stadium comes down, we will no longer have any Metro dollars going towards the new construction past 2027. You'll see some nominal changes to the revenue estimates. We'll walk through what those changes are. Primarily, as Ben said, it's because there are more events than we had originally contemplated. At the backstop, it will be market dependent, but we're estimating about 25% of the transaction will be backstop, which is a substantial departure from the history of what we've done here in Metro. And as I mentioned, the only thing different, the only thing new from the term sheet to current as it relates to the financing plan was really the charge we heard from this body about how do we apply the excess revenues and the desire to have the ability to retire debt early. So you see the creation of the supplemental debt service reserve. We talked about that a lot at the document review session a couple weeks ago, as well as surplus going to capital repairs and to the bond prepayment account. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Scruggs.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Very nice to be back here. The last time I was here was 14 years ago when you all were contemplating the convention center, and we did the convention center then. So thank you for having me back. Very similar to the convention center, this is a bundle of revenues, and as Kelly indicated, there is some degree of non-ad valorem support. You may recall the convention center, about $650 million, over $400 million was supported by the non-ad valorem pledge, so a significant portion. Here, as we are talking about, is maybe up to $250 million, but that will really be dependent as we get out into the marketplace and talk to investors and think about the whole structure. So let me do a couple of things over the next several pages. Just want to talk about the available revenues, go over each one of the sources again, just to review it, and then want to go over how we think about how the debt would actually be structured and kind of put it all together for you so that you can see the projected revenues and the projected debt service costs and kind of the rationale. What we're trying to do here is, in terms of summarizing the finance plan, is a couple of things. We have a preliminary structure with 3 goals in mind to satisfy 6 constituents simultaneously. Let me just go over the constituents so you know who we're dealing with on my side. The rating agencies, I think you all know you have an excellent rating at the general obligation level. Again, this is going to be a new credit for the rating agencies. We've begun testing it out, haven't been finalized yet, so they have to be satisfied. Bond insurers, that is a component. There are a couple of bond insurers out there that if they like the credit, they can put their insurance on top of it. Slightly better rating, slightly lower cost overall. That would be a good thing as well. That's another constituent group. Investors, obviously, after all is said and done, we're doing all this for the investors so that they will lend the money and lend you $700 million. And then you have, obviously, the Sports Authority, you all, Metro, and the team. So those are the six constituents that when we think about what the overall finance plan should be or what the goals should be, we're trying to structure it around that. And again, the 3 goals: construct a revenue package that is sufficient to satisfy all the objectives. Number 2 is to minimize the costs, maximize the excess revenue for the purposes that are going to be outlined. Then number 3, as Kelly indicated, with the non-ad valorem tax, it's to minimize the amount of the non-ad valorem tax, minimize the overall risk exposure, and be able to save that pledge for other projects that you'll have in the future. So those are the goals. That's what we're trying to get done. All right, let's talk about the revenue streams for a couple of minutes here. We're going to review them generally in the order in which they are favorably received by the analyst community. The first one is the hotel occupancy tax. Remember, that was used with the convention center. When we did the convention center, that was the anchor revenue stream. It is the anchor revenue stream here. You guys have a tremendous track record of hotel growth. Hotel growth equals growth of the revenue stream. Obviously, what we want to do is to impress upon the rating community, the analyst community, what the strength of that revenue stream is and what its prospects are going forward. What we're going to be able to assume for rating agency discussion purposes is 2% per year. Listen, I realize that if you look at your track record over the past 10, 15 years, that is dramatically lower. However, the rating community and the investment community tends to be a conservative lot. And so when they think about a 2% growth, obviously to the extent that you blow through that and exceed that, there'll be excess revenue. And as Kelly indicated, more and more excess revenue can be used to prepay bonds. And so that's something that we keep in mind. The second is the water and sewer pilot payment. Now, the water sewer pilot payment is a transfer from the water department. Again, very, very solid revenue source. It's been in effect for about 20, 25 years. However, the goal is to eliminate that by the time the new stadium opens. So we're really only incorporating about 4 years of that, and then we're going to assume it goes away. Therefore, no transfer from the water department, no assessment on citizens to pay for that pilot that would then be transferred. So again, from the rating purposes, those are the two most favorably received sources. Okay, let's go to the next set, which are, generally speaking, the stadium-generated revenues. And they consist of twofold. Number one, there's the in-stadium sales taxes. And again, this is based on activity. We would obviously expect that with a new multi-use stadium, the amount of the sales tax revenues will increase. That's to be generally expected. So the greater the velocity of economic activity, the more events you have, the more people that attend, the greater the amount of the in-stadium revenue. And also, you probably say inflation and other things just would take that up naturally. So again, there's a slight increase assumed when you see the overall numbers, not dramatic, a couple of percent. The second type of stadium-generated revenue is ticket tax and team rent. We kind of bundled it together. It's a $3 per head ticket tax on all events, with a couple of exceptions that have been kind of funneled away. But for the most part, the football activity and then the other entertainment activity. And then the estimated team rent is based on the incremental $3 charge that would be assessed to the non-football activity. And again, CSL has estimated that. It's an estimate that we've used in conversations with rating agencies. And again, good source of revenue. We obviously know there's going to be activity. There's been a history of activity, not only with football, but with non-football events in Nashville. But again, not as solid in terms of rating assessment as you'd have your hotel occupancy tax. So those are the four primary revenue sources. There's the next revenue source, which is the development sales tax revenue. That is one that is a little more speculative in the sense that obviously you have a major project area that hasn't been built out. So you're making some assumptions. It's going to be 50% of the hotel and the retail taxes. But let me ask Aaron just to comment on that for a couple of pages here and give you an idea of how that project could lay out.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey. It's nice to be here with you all tonight. I think my role is to talk about how the East Bank plays a role within the broader project stadium finance plan. I'm going to move this up. So I think, as you are all aware, the state authorized a 130-acre sales tax capture zone that Metro is able to draw surrounding the stadium. And you can see that on the map outlined in that purple line. The participating parcels that would be part of that sales tax capture zone are those, we'll call them brown. And so within that area, 50% of the sales tax on hotel and retail spending is available to the project. And so that includes the stadium campus, right, the area that Metro owns today surrounding the old and the new stadium, as well as a development that you'll see both called the truck stop development and Station East. It's the same site. So those are the two major projects that are likely to happen within immediate proximity to the stadium, as well as the ones that we have some certainty over the timing over. Oh, sorry. You advanced that for me. Then I screwed it up again. So in addition to the revenues that we've already shared with you, the stadium campus revenue projections really reflect the broader East Bank vision. And that's the goal here, not to promise something that's different from what you've already approved within the East Bank. This is looking at what we think is likely to happen based on the Perkins Eastman and Metro's vision plan. And we've used a forecast scenario thinking about 5 million square feet of development across the broader campus, which is on the conservative end. We've looked at, future development that includes a mix of heights and densities and, different development types, a mix of uses, different types of housing, different levels of affordability. So we're talking about both affordable housing, mixed income housing, that probably includes workforce and market rate housing. The physical plan that you've already seen that includes parks and green space and a mobility hub. So these are all of the aspects surrounding the stadium that will both generate tax revenue as well as allow the broader neighborhood to achieve the goals that you've outlined. And so the second development that's included within these tax revenue projections is the truck stop, which is Station East. And so that's actually could probably start before the campus development starts when you think about what delivers soonest within these projections. And so we've used plans submitted by the developer in fourth quarter of last year to inform our projections here. And so you can see those development features listed out on the slide. It's a pretty substantial 9-block redevelopment, that really has 1,400 residential units, 1.2 million square feet of office, 225,000 square feet of retail, 600 hotel rooms, and additional park space. So this is a meaningful full scale, and we think it's really important that that's part of this area since we have some level of certainty that they're already marketing and trying to move that project forward. And so earlier you all had authorized the procurement process to begin to find a developer for the Metro-owned land in the East Bank. And so that's in process as well. But when we think about the development timeline, Station East is likely to start a little bit ahead of when the development on Metro's land would likely start from that process. And so we're using fairly conservative assumptions across all of the development sales tax when we think about how mixed-use development performs nationally and how a development like this is likely to perform locally. And so when we look at the sales tax revenue projections on the next page, I think that our expectations are that there's a lot of different ways that the site could achieve those. And in all likelihood, you end up achieving greater sales tax than what we're showing over the course of the development.
Okay. Me back again here. Let's try to wrap this up in terms of summarizing the overall revenues, and then let's talk about the debt and kind of add it together here. So again, on this page, and I'm going to put on my readers here to make sure I give you the right colors, but we have tried to show the building blocks for each one of these types of revenues. So the one on the bottom, which is the dark purple, is the hotel occupancy tax. And that's growing at 2% per year. So again, this is what we show the analyst community. May not be what it ends up because it may be dramatically higher if obviously the past 20 years is any indication. The lighter purple, not the lightest purple, but the second tier of purple is the net in-stadium sales tax. And take one note there that it jumps up in 2027, to be expected. That's when you move into the new stadium. And then there's growth from there of a couple of % per year, really largely reflecting inflation activity as well as just increased activity as the years go along. The third, which is barely there for 4 years, as we talked about, the very, very light purple, is the water and sewer pilot. So that's the $4 million a year. So again, that's there for 4 years. Then on top of that, the green is the ticket tax and the team rent. You note again, a big jump up in 2027. That's when you move into the new stadium. You then get the increased activity, particularly of the non-football events, and that goes forward. Pretty much flatlining that in terms of the estimate. So again, hopefully that's a degree of conservatism. And then as Aaron indicated, these are the projections for the development sales tax in yellow. Obviously very, very little until 2028, 29 and thereafter, reflecting that that is the last component to come online. So adding all that up, what this really generally reflects, and of course, nothing is ever absolutely linear. Obviously, there are going to be bumps, jumps, less, more, but this generally reflects what one would think would be the estimated economic activity in Nashville. And again, when we're thinking about structuring the overall transaction, we're thinking about how does the debt fit into that projected revenue stream? Because this is what we want to make sure all the analysts and all the Wall Street community is comfortable with. So let's go to the next page. And this is a preliminary estimate of the debt side. So this is not the most exciting chart in the world, but that's good. Because one of the things that is actually very helpful is that what we're basically assuming here, what we're basically structuring here, is a level debt, level annual payment approach. Very similar to if you take out a 30-year mortgage, and I'll explain a couple blips in a minute. This is your annual principal and interest over a 30-year period, 30 years from the estimated time that the stadium opens in 2027. From a analyst community, this is considered to be the most conservative and is the most favorably received form of debt service. This is what we meant to do. This is what we believe will get the best possible ratings as well as the best possible reception by investors. So you have a couple of blips there, which I feel like I'm repeating myself in terms of when these blips occur. You have the 2027 coming online of the football stadium. And then in 2030, this is when the state withholdings, when that gets eliminated so that the full capture of the state sales tax is in effect. So again, the reason why we took a little bit of a jump up on both of those is that they are fully expected. And so it is very logical from the standpoint of a rating analyst as well as an investor analyst to assume that that will be a natural step up. Then after that, level as level can get. So now let's put it all together here. So the green line was the previous page. That's your level debt service. The gray bars was the previous page. That was the estimated revenue. The reason we put this chart here is to show you what the potential coverage is. This is what we really emphasize to rating agencies and investors. This is the meat of it right here. It's what we call the coverage. And so obviously, when I say that level debt service is the most accepted thing, you can see why. Yes, if the level of activity comes close to what the estimates are, you're going to have far more money. That's the excess revenue. That's obviously what we all hope. That's in case of a convention center, that's what you've gotten. So again, it would absolutely give all the excess revenue for the required uses. But from a standpoint of the investors and from the standpoint of the rating agencies, this is what they want to see on day one. So let's talk for a minute, or at least show you a chart here about sensitivities for excess revenue. This is a chart that shows you what the level of sensitivity is if certain revenue streams behave in certain ways. The purple line in the middle is what we've been showing. That's kind of the base case assumption. The green line, the only thing that differs there from the purple line is to assume that the hotel occupancy tax grows at 5% per year. Remember, over the past 10, 15 years, you all have grown your hotel occupancy tax somewhere in that 10% per year range. Obviously, there was a blip there for COVID, but there were tremendous years in there as well. So that shows it at 5%. Again, I'm not sitting here to tell you that's what's going to happen. Guarantee it's going to happen. There are no guarantees. But I'm just going to tell you that particularly compared to how Nashville has performed, this is not utterly, insanely crazy. The yellow line is zero growth. And in fact, I actually have a chart in the back there in the appendix that you may have seen about what does the debt service coverage look like with zero growth. Still more than covers it by a significant amount. So again, something that we like to show the rating agencies because they always want to think about doomsday scenarios. Don't blame them, that's their job. But that's the type of thing that we do demonstrate to them. Yeah. No,
Bring it home. Yeah, I just want to articulate the yeah, hit it.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can I make one more point? It's what happens when I start running my mouth here. But one more point I want to make, and it's related to interest rate sensitivity. You know, I often get asked whenever doing any type of transaction, is this the right time to do it or should we wait? And I had a mentor about 30 years ago that said, you do the deal when the deal works, and you don't look back on it, because we can always play second guess on where rates go. They go up and down. But let me just give you a little bit of an idea of recently what's happened. So I think everybody knows there's been tremendous volatility in the interest rate market. But a year ago today, the most widely traded liquid security in the world, the 10-year U.S. Treasury note, that yield was at, I have to make sure I get my numbers right here, 2.39%. Well, as of the close Friday, which was a year later, it was at 3.48%. It's over 1%. Now, let me just translate to, if you have a 1% increase from the estimated numbers right now, it's $100 million of additional debt service. Not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. Not saying I know where the Fed's going to go with interest rates. But again, people ask, what's the impact? Just want to give you a factual number on it. Sorry, I know I kind of cut in on your parade there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, the development agreement does provide the Sports Authority with flexibility on the issuance of timing, but for all the reasons Jeff just said, the current expectation is for the Sports Authority to issue these bonds sometime this summer. We've talked a lot about in the last several meetings, most recently in the document review session, all of the conditions that have to be met to make that happen. But I think we're really fortunate and all of our partners, the team and the state and the Sports Authority, and committed in taking advantage of the market opportunity in front of us and accelerating this transaction sooner rather than later. So with that, I think, Chair, we are complete. And just, again, there's a ton of appendix slides that are worth a little bit of time if you want to review them.
Thank you, Director Flannery. I appreciate it. And I've got a couple hands. I saw Councilmember Evans first. Councilmember, you're recognized.
Thank you. I may be the only one, but I don't know where this presentation is located. I thought it was provided ahead of time, but I don't have it in my email, and I'm wondering where I can locate it.
Director Flannery or Director Darby?
I can email it again, but it was emailed last week, I think Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
What'd you say? Oh, thanks for the
Councilmember Mendez, recognized.
Thanks. Director Flannery, a couple people texted me who are watching on TV asking about what non-ad valorem taxes mean, and maybe you could describe that and then repeat the point about what Metro taxes are going to be pledged and which ones aren't.
Page 18.
Yeah, sorry, that's appendix slide 18. Our fancy Wall Street banker says non-ad valorem taxes, but it is the non-tax revenue, so tax, property tax, and sales tax are kind of the big two taxes that Metro collects. The non-ad valorem or non-tax revenue are listed down below. It's mostly licenses, permits, fees, fines, those kind of things. And in the most recent fiscal year, that was about $233 million of the Metro $2.6 billion budget. There was a part to your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and just people who were watching didn't know what that meant. And the bottom line is, so property tax and sales tax wouldn't be pledged for this portion of it?
No, they're pledged to GO bondholders.
Yeah. Okay. Then and then I don't know who the right person is for these questions. In previous deals that at least the second term council members have seen, there was more detail about the and particularly I'm thinking about the transit deal. There was the finance plan for that had a year-by-year sources and uses. And so like on slide 13, where there's the bar graph about how much money is going to be used to pay the bond debt, I'm guesstimating that that's about half of the total revenue shown on the slide before.
Am I on the right slide?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like, that's not totaled, so of the total revenue over 30 years expected, like I'm eyeballing it about $45 million a year or half.
Sure, so slide 14 is a compilation of 12, the revenues, 13, the debt, and then anything above the green line would be expected surplus.
Right, I'm asking, can we get like the actual model that shows year by year sources
Sure,
and
it's
revenue?
in the appendix. Here you go. Slide, where'd the numbers go?
Well, that's the sources, that's not the uses.
Sorry.
Isn't that the sources?
So beyond debt service?
Right.
Okay, we can add a debt service column, sure.
Yeah, and then beyond that, surely you guys have got modeled how much is going to the various funds, the extra fund for paying the bonds early and the capital reserve and repair funds and everything else that the agreement calls for. Surely there's a model somewhere that shows how much money you expect to go to each of those year by year.
Sure, we can get that for you.
When can we get that?
Go with tomorrow, see how that lands. By the end of the week, how about that? Oh, I don't have numbers. Sorry. There you go.
Oh, there it is.
Found it.
Yeah, I mean,
We can,
honestly, there's no number. Surely you guys have got like an Excel spreadsheet.
we can send that to you probably now. How about that?
All right, great. If you could send it to Council Director Darby, that would be fantastic.
We know where.
I don't have my phone.
Councilmember Mendez. Councilmember Allen, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I read this somewhere, but I just need somebody to explain it again. There's a section that talks about defeasing the bonds, and officially, I think that gets run through the Sports Authority, but can you explain again where the Sports Authority is getting the funds that it's using to defease the existing bonds on the existing stadium?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, there's outstanding debt from the construction of the existing stadium that will have to be defeased because we are pledging a portion of the same revenues to the new stadium, and the team will be funding that defeasance.
Councilmember Allen, you got anything else?
This may be a question for someone else, but we have heard the statement, this is a more expensive stadium than anyone else has ever financed. Maybe I'm asking you this question. When you look at all the other projects and how much money is spent, is that just appropriate to be at that point in as things grow?
Let me see the floor so I knows better.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, it'll work.
I mean, Ben and I can both answer this. The stadium budget for this stadium's in line with what we're seeing for stadiums of this size. So it's pretty consistent with elsewhere in the country. And as you know, there are several NFL stadiums under development. So it's a really good benchmark in the market right now. Or as you may know, I don't know if you know.
Councilmember Allen.
And then the other one is just the numbers that we're seeing here. Can you kind of state what interest rate those are based on? I know we're not locked in, but.
Oh, that mic works. I don't know if it's turned on. Yeah, they're just, we use a scale from our desk.
Yeah, it's the blended interest rate is about 4.4%.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Benedict, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. few questions. Sorry, trying to figure out which one I want to go first. Can we go back to the slide with the number of events per year? I'm curious what we can do to ensure that we achieve 48 events per year so that we can do this. Is that something that we can, how can we ensure that what's on the slide happens for us?
I think the big thing that you're doing to ensure this, first and foremost, and I think like Jeff said in there's no absolutes here, but I think the putting the roof and allowing there to be some real flexibility in what goes on inside the building. What it's going to do is that it's going to extend for the building the concert series and the periods of when they can host those shows. Right now, obviously, there are challenges to do those during the year. There's damage to the field. There's additional cost to repair all of that. This is going to make this really basically the ability to turn key to go from football to one of those events. You could pick whether you want to go to soccer, you want to go to a concert. The ability to actually transition to that. It's going to allow now concerts to extend into the fall period and actually start earlier in the spring period. That's probably where the biggest difference between an outdoor stadium and one that has the roof. I think that's probably where you're going with that in terms of assuring what's happening there. I think the other side of it is that we are starting to see significant activity in the concert space. There's more performers, they're having to tour more, and the ability to go out and do a stadium show gives them the opportunity to go out and generate that revenue with less stops on the tour. And you're seeing more and more of that. We're having conversations now actively with promoters, and they're basically saying, don't look at 2022, the summer, as sort of the exception. Start looking at it as more of the rule going forward. And I think that's probably why when you look and you say, okay, Las Vegas did 15 concerts last year, we're sort of saying we're in a very similar type market. 16 starting in 2027 feels very comfortable, knowing you have 4 built in every year.
So do you think 172.5 is a good number? Do you think that's feasible?
I do.
In annual ticket revenue?
Yes.
Yeah. For the administration, then, is that something we could lock in the contract? The number of events and revenue? If we're asked to take this into consideration for approval of the deal.
It is not the deal we negotiated, and I would struggle to recommend that we would commit to something. I mean, there's force majeures that we couldn't possibly control, and I don't know what the remedy would be if it weren't satisfied.
Can we get those answers?
I wouldn't be a proponent or I wouldn't recommend putting that commitment on ourselves. I don't even know how you would enforce that.
I guess what I'm asking is these 48 events are based on, so we're being asked to take into consideration $172 million worth of annual ticket revenue. How are we going to realize that? How can I make a vote tomorrow based on realizing that revenue in the contract?
Sure, I think that anytime we approve any financing, and we make an assumption around revenues. I make an assumption every time we do the budget that people are going to pay their property taxes. I wouldn't get comfort in a mandate of 38 events. That doesn't mean that people are going to show up or buy tickets. So quantifying a number of events, I don't know what the benefit would be there.
Would the benefit not be that we know that we're going to receive a certain amount of revenue?
What would be the remedy?
What would be the remedy?
If we didn't collect, how would you resolve that?
Then I think we negotiate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's opportunities for us to make this deal better. So I don't think we're going to get an answer. I mean, I guess, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
Again, I've done a lot of convention center and other leisure facilities. I've never seen one where there's a guaranteed number of events. We didn't do it for Nashville 15 years ago, and obviously there was a faith that people would come to Nashville. They have, but there's no way that you can force people to come to an event if it's not scheduled. So again, as Ben indicated, it's the best estimates. All these type of projects are based on best estimates, which is why when you look at the way that we structure debt, we back it off. We don't assume that you get all those full events. There's a lot of excess built in there so that you don't have the full in-stadium collection of revenues and the other revenue sources.
Thank you. So I guess I'm not going to, so I'm not interested in the number of events. I'm interested in the revenue number, right? I'm interested in the money like your investors are, right? Like you are, right? So I'm interested in the taxpayers' money. So, and I do think remedy is, so my question is written down, what do we get if the revenue projections are not hit? So I guess that's my question. 172 million per year sounds great, right? When we look at the revenue and anyway, I'm belaboring the point clearly, but I think there's an opportunity for us to put something in the contract to this effect. Does the city own the truck stop property today? I think, no, the city doesn't. Okay, can we go to that slide? Because I had questions about that today. Okay, so it shows, so the SP is complete, right, for the 1,400 units? Is there an SP that's already done for that in zoning for land use?
I believe it's either in process or it's been approved by planning. They're working on it with them.
Thank you. I thought it was approved. Okay, yeah. Cool. I just wanted to make sure that. So if we don't own this today, but we're looking at potential revenue based on the start date, I guess, how do we anticipate, I mean, if we don't own the land today, what's the strategy to acquire it? And when will we start? Go ahead.
We don't need to acquire the land, so it can be, any private property can be within the sales tax zone. We're including it because, as you described, the plan is already in place, and so they're actually ahead of the timing on Metro's land, so they can generate sales tax revenue sooner than the land that Metro owns, so it's advantageous to the deal to be able to include it.
And my mistake in regards to Metro owning that land. So they are under process of redeveloping that land today as we speak?
They're actively marketing to tenants to try to put a shovel in the ground.
So we know that hopefully that will result in the work we're looking at. Mm-hmm. We know things change. The last question that I have is in regards to the stadium size. If we go to that slide.
That one?
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at the Nashville penetration range. Everything there is, I'm sorry, the new stadium building program doesn't match any of the numbers above it.
In terms of, well, let's just go ahead and take a look at it.
Exactly right, yeah. Luxury, yeah, go ahead.
The Nashville penetration range says that the capacity could be anywhere from 60 to 65. Basically, we're looking at a building right now that's 60, green check. Suites, 113 to 120. Running it on a penetration analysis, we're basically at 122. I think that's a pretty good green check when we're basically saying that we're extrapolating Cincinnati, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, Kansas City, Las Vegas, and Pittsburgh to this market. That's a pretty good indicator when we look back and we're within 2. And then when we look at club and loge seats, we're basically saying that the market probably could absorb 8,400 to 8,700. We're looking here saying that we're at 7,100. And I think that you take into account the idea that these will be, what's probably more important here is location versus necessarily the quantity. I think it gives the team the ability to look at the idea that there's a little bit more scarcity in terms of that. What you really don't want to get into is this idea that you have seats 5-10 years from now that are going unsold. This is giving the ability to look at the fact that the building should be sold really for the foreseeable future because of its size and the ability to create that scarcity on the ticket side. It doesn't, at the same time, the capacity of the building doesn't compromise you in what you're trying to do in terms of any of the other third-party events based on the projections that we were showing you right there. So when you think about where this building is and what you're trying to accomplish, it's a very right-sized building at this point in time when you look at all of those factors.
Thank you for that. I guess, so we're going from a larger stadium today that we sell out frequently to a smaller stadium. And so I guess is revenue going to go, today, how much revenue is generated based on attendance numbers at the Nissan Stadium as compared to a lower capacity, but potentially higher ticket prices, most likely, because that's what happens with stadiums, right? The new stadiums, ticket prices go up typically?
There has been increases in going into the new stadiums, yes.
Have we seen ticket prices go down at any new stadium?
You have not.
Okay, thank you. So I guess looking at the capacity, and you talked about supply demand, right? So if there's less supply, demand is higher, price goes up. But if we're looking at a stadium today that's bigger and we're selling it out, why do we want to go smaller? That's a big question in the public.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and just sort of let you know, you're not selling it out. The average attendance the last 5 years is 62,100. Okay. The Titans currently sell a little over 10,000 club seats. But if you go and look at the building today, where are those seats? They're the red seats. They're not in the better locations. So what you're doing is you're trying to sell what is supposed to be a higher value ticket.
But people are buying them, correct?
People are buying them, but they're not going to be buying them at the same price, perhaps, that they would buy them in the new building.
But they're buying them now.
There are about 10,000 of those that are sold. That's correct.
Thank you. So we're going down on that, but the prices will be going up. Down on numbers, but prices going up. Is that right?
I think what you're doing is you're putting those club seats in the better locations.
Got it.
And you're taking advantage of Real Estate 101.
You know what I do for a living.
I did not know that. I did not. I have no background on anyone, but I just, obviously I think that's really what you look at inside of a building. It's really the same concept.
I have one more question. I think it's for Ms. Talkington. Why should we build up this area when it hasn't been built up so far? Why has it taken 20 years for us to not build it up that we now think we're going to build it up?
Well, I think based on my understanding, the land surrounding the stadium today is encumbered by the existing Titans lease. And so Metro couldn't build it up. They didn't have the development rights.
Right on, but any ideas? I'm talking about, again, real estate, highest and best use. I'm not so much talking about ownership and control here. I'm talking about highest and best use and what it could do for us that it hasn't done, and why we think past performance is not indicative of future.
Right. I think that sometimes in real estate, the hardest thing is to look back at data and understand the qualitative factors that created it. And in this case, the qualitative factor that created the past performance is that no one could develop it because it was encumbered by parking by the Titans.
The Titans chose to not develop it then, right? The Titans could have developed it, correct? So 4,000 spots. I'm sorry, Director Darby, it sounds like the state might have required 4,000 parking spots. And how many are there on the asphalt there today? Do we know?
I do not
or
know.
Administration?
I want to say 7,500.
Okay,
7,000.
7,500. So we've got 3,500 parking spots. How many square feet is that? I don't know, but it could be built. And it wasn't built because it might not be good to build there. I'm not suggesting that's true. I'm not suggesting it's not true.
I think the teams fairly recently have come to the realization that there's a benefit to them of building around their stadiums. And the benefit of what that development looks like has changed pretty substantially in the last 5 to 10 years. That's one of the reasons, as Kelly was describing, what I do on a day-to-day basis, that more and more of our work is thinking about how venue-anchored development might evolve, because all of the players involved are now thinking about how this might become a much more exciting venture. And that's not to say, I can't speak for the Titans and why they may or may not have done anything over the last 20 years. But I can say that today, the economics and the outlook for development in Nashville is very strong. The idea that the East Bank is going to be a natural location for additional development, both of the character that's described in the East Bank plan, as well as the character of what you see around it, is highly likely. And when you look at the real estate investment communities' desire to invest in different locations within the U.S., Nashville is very high on their list. And that's somewhat new. Not entirely new, but somewhat new. It keeps rising every year. And so that's where we look at the market beyond just basic supply and demand and say that, there are conditions today that make East Bank more likely to develop than it has in the past.
I really appreciate what you just said in regards to Nashville being a phenomenal place. We wanted to make sure it's a phenomenal place for all of our folks, all the folks that I represent that have been asking me questions about this, that are the questions that I'm asking you. So thank you for your time and asking those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Benedict. Councilmember Suara, you're recognized. You're recognized.
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions. I want to start with the backstop, the 250 million. I know that it says that it's non-tax revenue. We've got that explained. Is this where, if the revenue projection is not enough to pay the bonds, then we use those to pay it? And is this where the resolution where it says if we do that, we'll get our money back comes into play?
That's correct. And in the event that the revenues pledged to the stadium fell short, and it would be unlikely that it would be zero, right? So let's say debt service is $10 million and we only collect $9 million. If that portion of debt is backstop, we would then look to find that shortfall out of this basket of revenues.
And we're not using tax revenue. Thank you. My question is to the gentleman on my far left. I'm sorry if I didn't write down your name. As the expert that helps cities with stadium and things like that, I know someone asked about the cost of building a stadium. I think there's a question that has been going around that we've never found a great answer to. What is the average cost of renovating a stadium?
What is the average cost of building a stadium?
Renovating a stadium.
Renovating a stadium?
Yes.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give you an answer tonight of exactly renovating a stadium because there are so many different factors that are going to go into the magnitude of those renovations. I will tell you that right now, when you're trying to go out and take a stadium and or an arena, and you're going to look at trying to accomplish what you can in a new building, you're probably going to come close to spending almost what the cost of the new building is, and you're never going to quite get the same result. You're going to still, because you're going to have to update your systems, you're going to have to, try to widen your concourses, you're going to struggle to add restroom facilities and bring those up to the standards that you have today, the concessions and the points of sale. So there's a lot of those challenges that you're not going to quite get to, even if you can accomplish what you would set out, say, in the seating bowl with the different products you're trying to add to the mix. So it's one of those where it can be a challenge. We've done studies for teams where we've looked at renovating, and in fairness, we've actually gone back with a report that showed you couldn't actually pay for any of them. Trying to do some of the new things you would do in a stadium, you couldn't physically even repay for those. They become tough.
Oh, it's always on. Hi. So it's a difficult question to answer because there are not many examples of renovations of stadiums. There are some, but they're not frequent, and they're also usually a very narrow scope of work. For a renovation of this scale, it ends up being quite costly, and we're working on a project right now in Barcelona with the Camp Nou stadium being renovated. And that cost of that project is close to 1.5 billion euros, which is approximately $1.6 billion to renovate it. And that renovation will not have the premium spaces that are competitive with the rest of the market. So a renovation is always unsatisfactory because you can't really change the geometry of a building. It's like a kitchen that's too small. You can renovate it and it'll be a nicer kitchen, but it's still going to be too small. You just can't fix the geometry if you don't have the space for it. And so the whole concept here is to not try to do a renovation that will be very expensive and then at the same time not deliver what is ultimately needed. And at the same time, the new building is going to free up the waterfront, which is going to make the development around the stadium much more attractive. And so there's a lot of good reasons for doing this.
So the reason why I'm asking is that when we're looking at the costs of building, I think it's always good to have something to compare to, and we've just never had that. And so having an average cost will be great if there's anything like that. And then along that line, what is the when you look at renovations, which you don't have a whole lot of, what is the number of years it takes to have to do another one? What is the use like, and what is the number of years that one will last?
So that's a really good question too, because even when you build a new building, there are certain items that you have to replace every decade, every 20 years, like scoreboards. The technology changes so quickly, and you can't often get spare parts to fix old scoreboards. So with an old building that you renovate, if you haven't addressed structural issues with the building, because often old buildings have structural problems that in a renovation, you might do some of them, but you don't do all of them. Undoubtedly, you will not fix all the structural problems in a building. And so renovations are good for 15 years, maybe 20 years, if you spend a lot of money upfront on it. But then you'll have to do a renovation again or a new build at that time, and it can get pretty costly. A new building should have a useful life of 30 years before a massive renovation is needed, but you will need over time investments in the building to maintain it at the current standard.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Talkington. When looking at the numbers that we're given, all the projections that we're looking at, it appears as if we're only showing the revenue projections. What will we use to pay the bond down and all of that, taking into consideration the East Bank as well. But what about the costs? Is there any estimate of what that will cost in order to be able to yield that revenue?
You mean the cost to build those buildings?
Build those buildings, yes.
So I think the idea is that cost would be borne by a private developer who would lease that land from Metro. So there would be no cost to Metro to build those buildings. There might be infrastructure costs within the East Bank, but the actual buildings that would host the retail and the office and the hospitality that generate that tax would be paid for and owned and operated by private parties.
So as we're looking at this building and we're saying we'll yield this revenue, do you have an estimate of the infrastructure costs? What would the cost be to Metro?
The East Bank team has been working on those estimates to really understand the infrastructure needs, and I think that's a cost that I think if they we could provide if they have something that they'd like to share. I think it's been shared through some of the East Bank process in the past, and it's constantly changing, but it's going down as we look at it.
And those will be through GO bonds, right? Ms. Kelly?
I think that's an assumption, sure. And if these revenues projections are accurate, I think we've all accepted that they're super conservative. There's the development, the campus-wide sales tax that could be an opportunity that would likely require some sort of backstop for sure, because it is speculative in nature, but I think there's an opportunity there. But we don't.
So do we have it where, and I'm sorry, in terms of the use of the revenue, if we have excess revenue, I know we said we're going to do acceleration of bond payments, but can we also include where it actually goes to cover those infrastructure costs as well?
So on the slide I have on the screen, those revenues 1 through 4 are, well, I'll include the water sewer pilot. Those are per state statute or Metro code as it relates to the pilot, mandated to stay within the stadium. So the other ones have to remain stadium development, construction, or debt service payments. The only one that's fungible would be the campus-wide sales tax.
And that could potentially help with that.
Yeah, I think we're still doing that work with the rating agencies, but if there's not any real value generated from that revenue and we don't need it to pledge to the transaction, then we won't pledge it. This is the basket of available revenues, and if the intel we get back is we have enough coverage with the first 4, then we could hold that back and use it exclusively to fund infrastructure. We're just not that far enough along. I can't remember if you said it today or at the Sports Authority. There's only so far we can go in marketing and reaching out to investors until we have approvals, and so we're just not there yet.
I will say that as we continue the conversation, that is something that I would like to see, because that is a burden that's one of the concerns, is that what does that East Bank do to Metro funds and things like that. So if a part of it can be covered from all of this, I think that helps a lot. And then I'm going to ask one last question, and this is, and I don't know who is going to take this, it may not be you guys, it might be Ms. Darby, and that is with regards to the state. Is there anything here as we're looking at this where the state is planning or thinking about taking over the sports authority? It is a $1 billion asset that we're looking at. So if they do that, are we still stuck with that liability, or how does that end up, and where are we with that?
Ms. Darby, you recognize.
Thanks. I have not looked at the state legislation today, so I don't know if there are amendments that have changed anything. But it's my understanding that the legislation that is out there seeks to take some of the nominations for the position on the board. It does not change any of the requirements or the duties and responsibilities that the board has to the properties or to the metropolitan government. The state law indicates that the Sports Authority is an instrumentality of the metropolitan government, so they still would be working, should be working to the benefit of the metropolitan government.
Thank you. And very, very last question. Any possibility that the state can stop the use of these revenues or divert it to something else, or stop us from using it the way that it's projected?
I don't want to predict something like that, but, these revenues are authorized pursuant to state law. That means, but for the state law, we would not be authorized to levy some of the tax revenues, I should say, not all of the revenues, but the tax revenues that the state has authorized, the campus sales tax, the geographic area tax, the hotel tax. Those are all specifically authorized to be levied pursuant to state law and distributed to.
Councilwoman, if I can just make one statement. Taking revenue away gets my antenna up. So I will assure you that every rating agency and every investor will want to see a legal opinion that once pledged, and which is conventional in the entire municipal marketplace, once revenue is pledged, you cannot reverse it. It's contract law. But that will be a requirement for moving forward and actually doing bonds.
That's good to know.
Councilmember Toombs, you recognize. Councilmember Toombs, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. So question in terms of the revenue. So the revenue projections are very conservative. So assuming, let's say that revenues far exceed the projections. And we have where the excess funds go to prepaid bonds, and then they go into all of these buckets. What happens if the revenue is far and above what is needed to maintain the stadium?
We would continue to pay debt until the debt was retired.
If the debt is, we get to pay the debt off early.
I think there's enough lawyers in here to keep me honest, but I think there would be an opportunity to either turn off or redirect the 1% hotel tax to a different purpose.
Okay. And do we have projections on what it would cost to maintain the new stadium once built?
In the documents, and I can't remember which one, there is a process so that we never kind of get to where we are now, right, where we can't agree on what it looks like to maintain the stadium. And part of that, and again, the drafters are in the room, so I'm speaking a little above my skis here, but I believe it's every 3 years there's a look both backwards and forwards on what has been funded and what needs to be funded. And so those projections will kind of, for me, it's most relatable to the actuarial report we do for OPEB. We do an experience study every year that looks forward and looks backwards, so it helps us project, what we're going to need going in the future, and it's the same kind of construct there. So could anyone sit here today and tell you in 2040 that a new stadium's going to need an escalator or an elevator? Not definitively, but as we start going through the process, and every 3 years they will have that external third-party review coming in. Here's what we did, here's what you need to do. It will kind of answer those questions as we go along. So there could be years if the revenue really does outperform where there is excess, and there's a process for that. And if it's not for the ongoing maintenance of the stadium, approvals required to that. It is not a blank check for the team to go and buy, I don't know, something cool. I don't know. Whatever the amazing technology is of the day, it will require the Sports Authority's approval.
So any excess funds, or as the funds come in, they go through the Sports Authority?
There is yes, that chart somewhere. Here we go, sure. So here's how the funds flow. There's different buckets that fill up, but for those kind of unanticipated, not necessarily kind of the nice to haves, not need to haves, there's a process for the Sports Authority Board to approve those requisition requests.
That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Hurt, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question, is it reasonable to assume that since it's going to be a covered dome, that the sustainability is going to be longer and the wear and tear of the facility will not diminish or depreciate as quickly as it would with it being an outside and an uncovered facility?
Good.
I would say that I think that from your perspective of what you're talking about there, the elements inside the seating bowl, or the idea right now that you have certain areas in your stadium that are exposed in the concourse areas to sunlight, rain, other of the elements, yes, I would say that those areas are, if you were to look back right now at a new building, that you're probably looking at some of the buildings that have roofs on them are going through what I would sort of say is the cosmetic changes that may happen. That is, the carpet has finally worn to that point. And I would say you're probably looking at that in a dome building of being somewhere close to 15 years. Whereas you would imagine that in those that are exposed to the sunlight and other things, you're not going to quite get them to last that long. So yes, you'll get some things that will have a longer lifespan.
Okay, so
absent technology.
Okay, so in this East Bank area, we are prone to tornadoes and things of that nature. How will that dome, and I mean, I know it's not a roof, but how would that sustain itself through those elements?
That's getting past my area of expertise.
Not it.
There you go. You can use that one.
It works. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
So,
pick it up to your mouth.
Pull it out. Pull it out there. There you go.
So, the building will have to be designed to building code, right? And so building code today is so much better than it was in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And so the roof and will have to be up to that code. But what we are seeing is that the technology of stadium design has progressed so much from the 1990s when your building that you have today was built. There was sort of that period in the early 1990s where Camden Yards came online, and any building that was sort of designed before everyone saw the power of Camden Yards it was either you got a Camden Yards like amazing building, or you got sort of the old buildings that aren't as amazing. And so you're more in that second category today. And so now the design of stadiums today really integrate the best design, the best technology, and have a much longer life associated with them as a result from the structural components. I think a lot of the problems that happen with having an open air building is that the expansion joints wear and tear happens much more quickly. The structural elements, the steel gets subjected to weather and elements so much more. And so
to repair those items, no one sees that work, right? It's just money that happens, like the foundation of your home. Who wants to spend money on the foundation of their home? No one sees that, but that's the problem with an open air building versus a covered building. So in a covered building, the things that Ben mentioned are going to be the things you have to deal with much more early on than structural elements. The roof will have a maintenance program of itself, but the technology around roofs is amazing right now. And just in terms of severe weather events, I mean, God forbid, the tornadoes have been just horrible lately, but certainly domed buildings in Florida have hurricanes and have withstood hurricanes, and often the stadiums, I mean, we all saw with Katrina what happened there. The stadium became the safest place in New Orleans. Sadly, it wasn't handled well at all, but that gives some sense of how the buildings will do.
Okay, so this is my last question, and I think I'd like to hear from you, Stacy, Matt, and perhaps even Jeff, Mr. Scruggs.
Haven't you heard from me enough?
So, in your professional opinion, I just know that these young folks are just so extremely brilliant these days, and I like the perspective, you know, that they may bring to answering these questions. But based on this city in comparison to others, the hospitality history that we have, and the national data, and your experience in dealing with this, is this a sound financial investment for this city? And if so, or why not, I'd like to know. Why or why not? You got the question?
No, I was going to give you my initial answer.
Okay.
Councilwoman, I'm extremely bullish on Nashville. Having been around you for 15 years, I recall that type of sentiment when the convention center was being bandied about. And there was a lot of hand-wringing about, geez, you know, we got this hotel tax and then this area of development. It has been an amazing success, and that's a testament to Metro. It's a testament to the growing activity in Nashville. All of us see, and I work nationally. I'm in charge of the whole group that works nationally. We all know who the growth areas are, or what the growth areas are. Nashville's at the very top, and I'm not saying it just to hear myself talk here. Any data, any publication in terms of growth of the region, in terms of wealth of the region. I know there are a lot of non-wealthy folks, and unfortunately that's the case in every metropolitan area. But the overall wealth factor and activity is at the top of the heap right now. I mean, you are really in kind of the elite cities, and that's reflected in what I'm going to say what your overall debt rating is, because that's a reflection of the overall city. Now, when I look at, is this the type of project that can work? I feel better about this in terms of what's already out there than your convention center 15 years ago, and I was very bullish on that. And I think what's reflected there is it took $400 and so odd million of support from Metro in 2009 to get people comfortable with that. Here we're talking about maybe up to 250 on approximately the same amount of debt that's going to be issued. And that is a reflection on how all those constituent groups I talked about feel about Nashville. And it's a reflection on how just nationally Nashville is now situated. So I'm the old guy answering that. You said young people.
I want Matt to answer also. That was the
I'm giving him a
young
chance
guy.
to think, so that's why my mouth was running.
Yeah. And I was also, the other piece of my other question was about the increase in the usage. You know, since there's going to be more activities, how is that going to play into the sustainability? But I really would like to hear from Matt, because of where we're going.
Of course. I mean, from my quote-unquote young perspective, there's no place like Nashville. I mean, whether it's a bachelorette party, whether it's, getting away. I'm from Chicago, so frankly, folks come here all the time. And especially with respect to the stadium financing, I mean, you look at the old lease versus the new lease, and the burden that's on Metro getting away from that is huge. The additional tax revenues that you have coming in pledged against the bonds, the fact that the non-tax pledge is minimized by the additional revenues that we do have to use for the transaction, I think is a great move for Nashville going forward. And yeah, that's frankly what I have to say about that.
And I would just add that, and you might not like this, so I apologize in advance, but one of our other clients had said to me when I said, oh, I'm working with Nashville and I would be there. And he said, oh, Nash Vegas. I love Nashville. And I know that might not be the comparison you all like, but the one area where I think that comparison is powerful is with regards to football. So the Raiders moving to Las Vegas, there was a lot of concern. Could Vegas handle that? Do they have enough population base to support a football team? There's a lot of concern about that. It has exceeded every expectations. Everyone travels to go see a Raiders game in Las Vegas. If people are going to travel for a football game, it's in Las Vegas. Nashville is the only other city that I think could have that same appeal to travel and people coming for football. Similarly, to Vegas, with having a dome, with your music industry here, which is so prominent and everyone thinks of Nashville, immediately thinks of music. This stadium, in my mind, it's a giant arena. And so the number of events it has each year, in my opinion, that 48 events, I hope to see it have far more than that. I hope to see this have a concert residency, things that you associate with Las Vegas and entertainment, I think could happen here in this domed building. And so I think this is a tremendous investment. And I think Matt highlighted how much better the lease is with this new lease than the old lease.
Thank you, council members. Councilmember Young, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, Councilmember Hurd asked about young people opinion or something like that, and you come to me. How nice. So I want to go back because Councilmember Benedict was hitting on some things that I think are actually important regarding the ticket revenue and number of events and whatnot. And I think, am I wrong, I guess, in saying, or it looks like we're expecting about $45 million in debt service when we look at, I think it's on 13 maybe. But then when we look back at page 12, when you look at the different sources of revenue we're going to have, and how our debt coverage is exceptional, am I wrong to think that, if for some reason those number of events are not, those projections are not met, we have so many other sources of coverage that it's not necessarily something to fret about. I think we will have far more than those conservative estimates of events. But, and I guess this would be for Mr. Scruggs maybe, am I wrong in thinking that our coverage is more than adequate, that's you could almost say between the development sales tax and hotel occupancy tax, that alone is providing our debt service, and the other is the gravy going into all the additional funds that we need to fund. Am I seeing that correctly?
Councilman, I would agree with you, and the way that I look at this, and again, I will say the rating agencies, insurers, investors don't take everything at face value. So if you say you're doing 48 events, they're not assuming 48 events. They're assuming less than 48 events. That's what their job is to be cynical. And so that's why when we talk about debt service coverage, we have to provide a whole chunk more than that. Remember, if this were a 100% supported transaction from the non-ad valorem pledge, people would shrug their shoulders and say, hey, great, whatever you want to assume. We're talking about a very small percentage relative to, and you've got to impress the agencies and the bond insurers and the investors. So they're automatically taking a haircut. Where will they take the haircut from first? They'll take it from the yellow bars, wouldn't you? If you were an investor, you would, because that's the one where those revenues haven't appeared yet. So that's the one they're going to take it from the most. They're then going to haircut the events. Remember, they're giving you credit on your strongest revenue stream, the hotel occupancy tax, which I'm sure probably most of you, I'll never say everybody, but most of you in the room would say, wait a minute, 2% per year? Let's just look back at what we've been doing. They don't care about that. 2% per year for them is being conservative. So even if you assume that more will come out of that hotel stream, they're haircutting everything else and they're getting very comfortable. And so when they think about the coverage, Councilman Young, as you indicated, they're already applying a haircut there.
Perfect. And Director Flannery, I know you and Councilmember Benedict had some back and forth about putting, in writing, requiring a certain number of events and ticket revenue and whatnot. But am I wrong in thinking that it is in the team's absolute best interest to have as many events as possible, because that is another source of income for them, as well as that's how, they're going to fund the additional funds beyond debt service to provide additional CapEx expense and maintenance? Am I wrong there? Or, because the last time I checked, the team's a private entity that wants to make money. And I would think they want to try and book as many of events and sell as many tickets as possible. So I guess that's kind of why I tend to agree with you, I think, on, why would you have a minimum number of events in a contract when, their goal is to have as much ticket revenue as possible? Am I off base there?
No, that sounds accurate.
Okay. And then the last question, probably back to you, Mr. Scruggs. When we look down on page 21, the allocation of excess revenues, and we look at bond prepayment.
Oh, there. Yes, sir.
The bond prepayment, it says it's up to 33% of the original par. So we are only able, let's just assume maybe things go phenomenally well and we're just flush with excess revenue, and we can only prepay 33% of that original amount. Is that cumulatively, or?
Well, it's, and I would check with your counsel. I don't think, again, these documents have not been finalized yet.
Sure.
So that is not in my opinion, sacrosanct.
Okay.
It's only 33%. Councilman before raised the issue of, well, can there be some flow of money going down to take care of expenses for infrastructure, for development? And, again, these are the excess revenues. So what is most important from a bond perspective is obviously the flow of monies to take care of maintain the facility. Clearly very, very important. I look at that supplemental debt service reserve. I love supplemental reserves. And any additional monies for bondholders is going to be very well received. And then using them for capital and for some amount of bond prepayment, fantastic. But there is still some flexibility in there.
Well, I guess what I was getting at is, as the underwriter, is there, are we going to be limited to that, to make it attractive to investors? Because if I'm an investor, I don't necessarily want a prepayment because I want to drag it out for the original term and make my interest. So is that something, how we're making it to keep it attractive to investors by limiting that prepayment? Is that where that's coming from, or maybe just?
Councilman, that doesn't affect an investor's point of view, because an investor has a very specific, there's a very specific kind of set of rules around being able to prepay its debt.
Okay.
And to kind of give you an order of magnitude, if the expected revenues happened as they did and all this flow went through, you'd be prepaying the bonds about 7 years early.
Okay.
Okay, so 2051, knock on wood, I'm around to see that, but 2051.
Well, you're a young man, you will.
Oh,
I think Councilmember Hurt might disagree. She might not think you're a young man.
You're not seeing the gray on the temples. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 3 questions, and I just want some clarification. So the first one, I want to go back to what Councilwoman Toombs was asking about the excess revenues. And do those, any changes to that, it only goes before the Sports Authority, or would it come to Metro Council as well? Or any kind of change beyond this plan?
I think it's just Sports Authority, but I'm looking to all the lawyers. Can you talk? Like to defer to bond counsel.
Okay.
So, Jeff Oldham, Bass, Berry, and Sims. So, under the intergovernmental agreement, this body has the right to approve to any change to the lease that would get in the way of money flowing to either the eligible projects fund. That's the fund that you can use to fund certain infrastructure projects in the East Bank, or the bond prepayment and liquidity fund.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had, I was just reviewing the updates from Ms. Hauser about the legislation activities. So it looks like the current potential configuration of the Sports Authority is 7 Metro appointees, 6 others outside of Metro. Is that accurate?
The configuration?
For the Sports Authority legislation.
I can answer that one. It's 7, 6. The 6 can be from, there's one has to be in West, one in East, and the others can be in Middle Tennessee. So they could all be from Davidson County, or they could be from one from Sumner, one from Wilson. So that's kind of how it's set up right now. That's what the amendment was that was put on last week in the Senate. So that's where we are on that.
This isn't the state legislature now, is it?
Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And then my other question, I wanted to go back to what Councilmember Suara was talking about related to the East Bank and the infrastructure improvements. Is there, because like the way, I guess, the different slides are laid out with the different funding types and how it's allocated and everything, that's really helpful to see. Is there anything on the East Bank side that also looks at like the, best case scenario, everything is free to Metro and we don't have to pay for any infrastructure, to like the, whatever the worst case scenario is, that we're paying for everything? And then how would that break down into, road cost estimates and water and sewer and those kinds of things? Is there that level of detail? Does it exist?
So I think on the question of total costs, the team has been working on those numbers constantly. The question of who pays, I think, is not part of the plan yet.
I guess before third reading, could we have some kind of estimate that speaks to that? Because I'm also looking at like the idea, of course, of like future capital spending plans, like how much are we potentially spending, like what percentage of money could be used in future CSPs to fund those things, and kind of thinking through how that would work longer term.
You're right, Dennis.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of items. One, I think we've...
Would you do me a favor? Introduce yourself. We all know who you are.
Sorry, Sam Wilcox, Deputy Mayor. I think we've conservatively estimated the phase 1 infrastructure cost in the responses we've previously provided council. I think we estimate them around $150 million for phase 1. As Aaron said, we think those numbers are coming down, but you've got a lot of variables moving both directions. There are other tools available to us beyond GO bonds to fund that infrastructure. Pledges from developer, the eligible funds from the area sales tax. That's 50% of the area sales tax for stadium-related infrastructure, but that could be anything from parking or portion of the park or something else. We also will know more once we finalize negotiations with a developer that comes out of the RFQ process, which is ongoing, but we could make a portion of the property increment available to them to refund them for infrastructure. So there are a lot of tools available to us, but that work is ongoing, and we will not have that work finalized before third reading. I'll just tell you now, we won't have the developer to on board for that. But that $150 million for phase 1 is, a conservative estimate.
Okay, and so the only, so just thinking about the future, the next council body that is thinking through these issues later, the only way, if it's a GO bond, the only way that they're really going to be able to solve for that, so let's say the future mayor decides, like, I'm going to have a CSP that has just nothing but East Bank infrastructure, and you don't get your sidewalk, Hermitage, sorry, or whatever it is. The only way that we'll be able to navigate that, or a future body, would just be to go through the regular amendment process. And
Yeah, I would doubt a future council would approve that CSP.
I would agree.
So,
But that's my answer is right? We're only going to be able to do it the same way that we're doing it for today. It's going to be making decisions based on whatever the CSP is and amending it like normal.
Yeah, if I'm understanding your question correctly, that's probably right. There might be some financing opportunities based on the ground, like financing part of the ground lease or other revenue sources, but
yeah,
I think if I'm answering your question.
You are. Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilmember Evans. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Mendez, you are recognized.
Thanks. Let me just follow up on Councilmember Evans' point, because I think, and just, I guess, Deputy Mayor Wilcox, you can tell me if I'm wrong about this. So I think the answer to the question is we don't have any idea what the East Bank Metro spend on infrastructure will be. An initial phase will be $150 million. I think when we approved the CIB last year, there was about $700 million worth of East Bank non-stadium stuff in there, and expect probably tax increment financing at some point to go along with it. And if any of that's incorrect, that at least puts a parameter around what the ultimate spending will be for Metro. What I was really going to ask about was going to go back to Councilmember Suarez's point, and not to ask a rhetorical question, but when the convention center deal was done, there was a bond lawyer opinion letter saying that the revenue sources were untouchable and reliable, right?
Well, they won't say they're reliable. They will say that they can't be diverted for other purposes unless it's clearly outlined in the flow of funds that they're available after certain parameters are met.
And despite that opinion letter, the state of Tennessee filed legislation this year to try to do just that with the convention center. And the current version, and Chair Roden can check me, I'm just reporting what I saw in the media last week. The current version of the Convention Center Authority bill is they're not going to touch the revenue sources, but they're going to outlaw any of it going back to Metro, which is currently about $15 million a year.
Yeah, I don't want to speak specifically because I don't have the legislation. I haven't seen it and read it all, but it's my understanding that there are guardrails on where the overruns on that can go now.
Yeah. So it was at least reported by the Business Journal that would make the $15 million a year, 14 point something to Metro from the Convention Center Authority revenue streams go away. And so I hear what you guys have said to Councilmember Suara about bond payments not being able to be interrupted because it would violate arguably the contracts clause of the U.S. Constitution for the state of Tennessee to impair the revenue sources that are committed to the bond holders. And I know there's history of litigation, at least way back in the 60s, between New York and Chase Manhattan Bank about a similar sort of thing. But the piece that's supposed to go to Metro, the up to $25 million a year that could go back to Metro, as I understand it, we're already being kind of aggressive in what we're going to, given the way the state law is written, that about how we're using that. And I don't think you guys can tell us that we can rely on the up to $25 million a year going back to Metro being reliable.
Was that a question?
Yep.
I have to defer to bond counsel on that.
So that revenue stream, this is the development area sales tax. And so it, under state law, so the state said it's available to be used to pay debt service on bonds. And it's also able to be used to pay for costs of infrastructure necessary to the operation of the stadium. So it's those two things. And so there are, as you pointed out, the constitutional law is that when the state empowers a revenue stream, and then a local government goes and then obligates it, that state legislation is a contract. They can't renege on that contract. In this case, those funds are going to be pledged two different places. First, to bondholders. Second, to the benefit of infrastructure that benefits not only Metro but also the team, because it's got to be stadium necessary. And so from day one, in our opinion, both the team and bondholders will have vested rights in that revenue stream, and I don't believe the state, I'm of the opinion the state can't take that away.
So if the comptroller's office comes by later and says, hey, okay, stadium, great, parking lot, okay, but you guys have overreached in saying that you can build a park straight down to the riverfront with that money, or you guys have stretched too far by saying you can use it to build a transit center a block away. If the comptroller comes in later and says the list of stuff you guys are paying for on that is outside the bounds of the couple words in the state statute, we'd have a fight on our hands, right?
We're prepared to render an opinion that stuff is stadium necessary infrastructure. The team is specifically contracted for us to build that stuff in the site coordination agreement specifically for the stadium.
I mean, so that means Bass is putting its malpractice policy on the hook?
Certainly. So to the extent, we'll, particularly if it's leveraged, as it certainly would be, to finance any debt that supported one of those things, if we continue on in this role, we'll absolutely be required to give an opinion about its enforceability.
Since this ordinance sits under consideration issues, bonds, when does the state signs off on that after council approval? Or have they already signed off on the ordinance?
Which ordinance? Just the overall ordinance?
Yeah.
There's no, I don't think there's any particular mechanism, unless I'm missing something, where they actually sign off on the ordinance. There are a couple of pieces they do have to sign off on. One specifically is the 130-acre designation. And another, they have to sign the state funding agreement. So that's a form of sign off. And then most importantly, they've got to chip in $500 million before the Sports Authority ever issues bonds. That's the ultimate sign off in our view. But there's no specific, we hereby see your ordinance and approve it.
And what we're talking about is outlined in the development agreement, right?
The $500 million, yeah, the $500 million is a condition. I think it's section 3.3. Sad that I know that. Section 3.3 of the development agreement includes that as a list of the conditions.
And the Sports Authority and the team are the parties to the development agreement?
That's exactly right.
All right, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendez. We've got a few left on the list here. We got Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Director Flannery, how much revenue is 1 penny worth of property tax worth?
Ooh.
Roughly. And because, we've got residential rates, commercial rates, but generally 3 million, 4 million?
Go with that.
Probably that, so 4 million. So a $500 million investment from the state. I understand the contract clause. I understand also that we've got some real nut jobs up the hill, and you can put that where you want. That doesn't help Nashville, but I don't care what it does for Emily. If they were to bail on that $500 million, how much tax revenue, what's the payment on that per year, and how much tax increase would be required to cover that?
So the state's GO bond, you're asking what their debt service would be?
Yep.
On 500 million?
30 million a year.
About 30 million.
About 25.
Well, they do 20-year debt. Sorry.
20 to 25.
20 to 25 million. I will say that they don't collect property taxes, so they're not backed by property taxes.
What I'm getting at here is hypothetically, the state bails on this. Nashville's now on the hook for making this payment. Is that right? No, not at all.
No, a condition of.
Help me with that. If they, so they're dangling the convention center over us. And I appreciate that Councilmember Suara brought this question up about the $500 million. I guess the question becomes, under what circumstance, if any, would the taxpayers of Nashville be on the hook to make any type of a payment at all for this $500 million from the state?
We will not issue our bonds until the state has provided its $500 million contribution. That is in the documents. It is.
And the state cannot renege on that $500 million, period,
We will
paragraph.
not issue bonds until we are in receipt of the $500 million from the state.
Okay.
I just.
Yep. Yeah.
I just want to give.
I think it's important for the public to understand that. And a lot of these questions that we ask is really about the public understanding, which is the next question that I've got too, which is your opinion that this deal cannot be made any better than it currently is?
Before you turn the page, I just want to, I appreciate the state, as we talk about it, we mean legislators, but I do want to give a shout out. The team at the comptroller's office, anytime we need anything, call them. Revenue, same thing. Purchasing, all of the divisions that live within finance, when we need help, they always help us. And I don't want to be confused with what's happening on the Hill and people who are actually trying to serve us.
And I sure hope nobody that works for the state, other than the folks, the legislators, take anything into consideration that I say about them. They are great workers.
Thank you. What was your second question?
My second was, do you think that it's possible at all to make this deal any better than what it is today?
I think the goal that was laid out back when we still contemplated renovation was how to take Metro taxpayers off the hook. And this deal does that. And so I think we've achieved that goal.
Do you think the council body could make it better?
I think the feedback that we received between the term sheet and now, you did make it better. And you'll see that when what we've brought to you in the financing plan, those were things that were not in the term sheet, that we took away what this body gave us as feedback and implemented it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you for taking that. And I think that that's the whole reason, and we're not going to talk legislatively on anything, but I think that's why the public has said, let's slow down. How can we make this better? And so it was made better, right? And so can it be made better still?
I think we heard Mr. Scruggs say from a financing perspective 2 weeks ago, we heard from the attorneys that the biggest damage you can do when you have a deal in front of you is walking away from it. And so we've heard interest rate volatility risks. We've heard risks of all sorts of things. And when we have this opportunity, it's in front of it. We've spent 9 months working it out and executing on it. I'm comfortable making a recommendation to move forward.
I appreciate that. I'm not sure that I'm quite there yet, but I appreciate that that's where you are. One clarifying question I thought of is, you mentioned that we'll have the state money before we issue the bonds. Will we have the Titans investment before we issue the bonds?
No, so and again, land of lawyers, keep me honest, the transaction contemplates the state funding and the city funding sitting in an account. They cannot draw, but the stadium, the team's portion, they still have homework to do, right? We have the estimate of what the cost will be, but they have to go out and get their architect of record and actually do their modeling. They are required to produce evidence of financial stability and sufficiency that they will execute, but no dollar, either the state contribution or our contribution, will be released until we've all received all dollars in one pot together.
Does it cost us anything to issue those bond notes but not have them pay for anything yet? So does it cost us anything to have that money just sitting there?
As it currently stands right now, Councilman, no is the answer because of the way the yield curve works for you in terms of just reinvesting that until the team is ready, and we're putting a time period on which the team has to come up with their money, about a 12 to 14 months, or what we call the deal collapses in bad. And
No, you get your money back and we don't owe you. Right.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
Okay, cool, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Benedict. For everybody out there who's raised their hand, you are on a list. Just hold on. Councilmember Sepulveda, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question regarding procurement. Just wanted to know what our procurement plan is for the construction of the stadium. And what I mean by that is, will there be contracts with every subcontractor? What is our plan to mitigate wage theft, and what is our safety plan? What are the number of minority contractors we aim to do business with, and labor as well? And what is our plan to make sure that we are not contracting bad actors? And by bad actors, I mean people who have multiple OSHA violations.
Ms. Flannery, who's going to take that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I, in my head, punted that to Tom Cross. I guess he didn't get the memo. Is he over there?
He's over there.
Okay.
Mr. Cross, you're recognized.
So I can answer part of that, and I believe Adolfo Birch from the team can answer the other part of it. The team is required to follow, under the development agreement, is required to follow Metro's own procurement rules and regulations in Title IV of the Metro Code in the selection both of the CM at risk and in their design services. And, Mr. Birch, I think, can take the rest of your question.
Hi. Oh, wow. Adolfo Birch, Chief External and Legal Affairs Officer for the Titans. That is correct. We are planning to have a robust plan that will include measures to protect against wage theft, measures to handle arbitration and deal with worker claims more quickly. There'll be some, I forget the name of it, but there'll be a capacity to have immediate payment of workers to, prohibit or to prevent some of the slow pay efforts. And we will also work through with the current procurement process that was put into place by Metro Council a few years back to come up with what our participation goals will be.
Thank you for that. When can we expect the plan?
I think that the plan, we're working diligently to go through the entire process to understand not only that, but our workforce, aims and objectives on whether it's building the database. There are a number of things that we're trying to do simultaneously. I think in terms of having a physical number, I would probably want to hesitate and wait until I could talk to our construction manager and some of the other folks that were going, because we still have to get the actual, developer involved.
Okay, thank you. When that is finalized, can you share that?
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember O'Connell, made it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, hearing tonight the enthusiasm for Metro to issue debt for this project, should we not expect a party seeking to maximize its own returns to have a larger share of the risk? I guess at some point from an underwriting standpoint, would we not push another party to contribute more here up front so that this wasn't all Metro's share?
I'm sorry, Councilman, can you?
I guess I'm just saying we could certainly, by restructuring the deal, reduce Metro's share that we are taking on risk for. And I'm just wondering if there's a point at which, we've seen a spectrum of stadiums be fully privately funded all the way up to this amount of funding. And so I'm wondering at what point an underwriter would advise the city to say, hey, seek better terms.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question because, as you indicated, there's a wide spectrum out there, and everybody looks at the affordability for everyone and what kind of facility you want, and what is it that you're getting out of this. When you say you, Metro, obviously, I mean in terms of number of people that come, number of people that put their money down in the city. Now, a lot of people don't believe in the multiplier effect, so I'm not going to give any lectures on economic theory here, but again, I have done deals where it's 100% city, and the city wanted it because they wanted the team and they believed in the multiplier effect. I've also been involved with municipalities that have said, I don't have the money to be able to give to it, and whether that was successful or not is a different thing. So it's hard for me to pass judgment, quite frankly. You do have 3 different sources. I will tell you that's unusual. The state contributing is unusual relative to other things I've seen out there. It's usually municipal entity and private sector. So when you take that into account, I don't know if you're considering that kind of part of what you/public sector is doing.
Maybe, I definitely do. Those bonds are well, I'm a Tennessean.
Yeah, okay, very fair. I'm not going to deny that, but obviously it's not a Metro contribution as I think of what the 2 normal sources are. And again, you're not just getting a football stadium, you're getting an event arena. So that's a little different. That's what's obviously increasing the cost and hopefully increasing the return as well. So that may sound like I'm rambling on and not giving you a precise answer, but it's just very difficult to give you a precise answer because it's really based on what you want out of it.
Thank you. And then I guess the second is connected to that, and this kind of comes back to, comments that I probably would be less excited about, and that is from destination city status. If we're saying it's an advantage for the stadium itself to be a destination originator, if going forward the city wants to, say, lower our bachelorette's flag and raise more of a family's flag, does this affect the judgment on anything about the terms of the financing or the appetite for risk, et cetera?
Councilman, I'm going to say in my deliberations, I haven't taken into account it being a bachelor or bachelorette haven.
We've heard it tonight.
No. I'm not going to deny that I've seen the trucks going by and that sort of thing in all my visits. But, clearly, when I think about the events that are going to be held there, I'm not necessarily thinking that this arena is going to hold bachelorette events, but it's obviously
we're drawing comparisons to the Raiders going to Vegas, and I think there are plenty of Nashvillians who don't want to be Nash Vegas.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are drawing that. I mean, that was one comment made to my colleague, and I don't think we agree with that. Now, obviously, there are different types of events that happen in any city, but I think when you're looking at the huge majority, I'll never say all again, of events that are going to occur in the stadium, they're going to be musical events, which I think are probably a little more family friendly. Football, which, draw your judgment. I love football, so I think of it as family friendly as well. I don't think of the the stadium as really focusing on maybe that type of event that you're referring to.
And then I guess I would ask my final point related to that is, given the structure of the revenue sources, it seems to be pretty intensive in a way that might limit the ability to hit pretty ambitious targets for specifically affordable housing within the East Bank Vision Plan. I don't know how this is going to impact the RFQ and eventually Metro as master developer, but I'm interested in what we think about expectations for hitting pretty aggressive targets on affordable housing.
I would say this does not impact any of the expectations of the RFQ. We've taken into account what we understand about the deal as we think about what is feasible and the very important affordability expectations that were outlined in the East Bank plan.
So let me link those two then, because I'm concerned that the RFQ is not going to produce the targets specified in the East Bank Vision Plan. And are you saying that we should not have that concern?
I'm saying that nothing about this particular deal that we're discussing tonight will impact that.
All right, I just want to be real clear. Do we think that given the nature of this deal and the structure of the financing, that we are expecting that we will hit the targets for affordable housing in the East Bank Vision Plan?
nothing about this deal is connected to the affordability requirements in the East Bank Vision Plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman, if I could just make one, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we show that yellow bar at the top, because, you know, if it is Metro's will that there be a certain amount of affordable housing and that's worked in, that's fine from the standpoint of the financing. And, you know, we're not reliant upon getting that level of revenue to secure the debt. It is, as I indicated, it's the least predictable component. And as all those other revenues that you have, we're relying on those a heck of a lot more.
Right. What I'm concerned about is that the campus is going to require a generative capacity that may exceed the ability to include affordable housing at a level that hits the targets. So that's what I'm concerned about. But I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, we got 4 people left. Let's see how quick we can get through these folks. Councilmember Bradford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got 3 questions. The first one is kind of a follow-up on the line of questioning from Councilmember Benedict and Councilmember Mendez. There was a lot of questions about the what-ifs with the state, and I'm of the opinion if I still have the question based on the answers, then I still need clarification. So I think this first question is developed as towards our bond representative. My understanding of what was discussed previously is the timeline. Council passes this deal, then the state signs off on the 130-acre capture zone, and then they deposit the $500 million into the fund. Is that the correct understanding? Okay. So Councilmember Benedict was kind of going on this line of questioning with the $500 million. What happens if state doesn't get it? We've heard that the Sports Authority does not issue any bonds until that happens. Is that the same thing if the state decides not to sign off on the 130 acres? If any of those situations do not happen, then this deal is frozen. Okay. I may have misheard earlier, but I thought I'd heard Ms. Flannery, when you started this presentation, you said there was a slide in this deck comparing this to other stadium deals. Was that nationwide, or because I want to know how this stacks up with the Sounds, the Bridgestone, and Geodis?
Sorry, it was a comparison of just the backstop component. So on slide 18, it references the convention center, the ballpark, and Geodis, and the amount of debt issued and the percent that was backstopped.
Okay. The last question I have, and when we were talking about affordable housing and taxes, I just want to clarify this. In the funding streams, any housing built or any property taxes generated within the East Bank comes straight to Metro. We're only looking at the sales taxes generated in this capture zone that's staying in the zone. Property taxes will still come back to Metro.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Bradford. Councilmember Sledge, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to some conversations about infrastructure, and in the Q&As that we provided, there's kind of 2 different phrases. I don't think you'd say that they were terms of art, but one of them is infrastructure necessary for the stadium to open, which is indicated that that's part of the stadium project budget. And then we've been talking a lot about this excess revenues and how that infrastructure could be stadium related. So I guess my first question is sort of how do we define infrastructure necessary for the stadium to open? And if it's defined, where is it?
You're recognized.
Jeff Oldham again, Bass Bean Sims. The best, so that's it starts from the statute itself. The best place to find it in the documents is the site coordination agreement, Article 6. Article 6 of the site coordination agreement talks about, I think it's titled just that, for that reason. And there are 3 components of it. There's parking. And, you know, I mean, the sort of the history with parking is that we've been providing 7,500 spots. That's going to be reduced now to 2,000 plus whatever's in the North Village. That's, you just got to have that to operate a stadium. That's the first component of it. The second component is Second Avenue, 2nd Street, I'm sorry. And that is a street, unlike others in the neighborhood, that will be closed on game days. It has to it functions sort of half like the campus, half like the stadium. It's necessary. The third is the park itself. They can't be built now because the existing stadium is still there. That is sort of a fundamental sort of way that they're going to activate this. The team's going to activate that stadium for it to work like it needs to work, is for that park to be there and function in what today is, tailgate type experience. Those are the three big components.
So to that end, so those are defined. We pass something that has those definitions in them. I hate to say set in stone, but how set in stone are those? In other words, we've talked a lot about state preemption, right? Like, how set in stone are those necessary to the state?
We're of the opinion that those are eligible under the statute, and so that's there. Could there be others? I suppose there could, and it all would just be a facts and circumstance sort of test. I'd be hesitant to try to guess at what those might be tonight.
Okay, thank you. That gets to, I think, my second piece, which is revenues going forward, right? This excess revenues, things that we talk about in the future, and making available the 50% area sales tax revenues. And it says, to the extent the infrastructure is stadium related as required by state statute. And the question I have is really just like what the definition of that infrastructure is, because I get back to, I think about what is infrastructure necessary for the stadium, right? Well, I would think that perhaps an argument could be made to say that there might have to be transit for workers to get to the stadium, and that's necessary for the stadium to operate. It could be any variety of items that maybe we're not sort of thinking about as a road or a parking lot or a park or whatever it might be. And I think I heard in earlier responses to Councilmember Mendez's questions about sort of like who determines what is necessary. Did you say that's the parties to the deal that determine what's necessary?
So ultimately, and I'm looking at Tom here, and Tom, Metro Legal and I have talked about this issue at length. Ultimately, there will be a time that comes where somebody says, we would like to finance XYZ from this bucket. And it's somewhere in there, someone will look at Metro Legal and whoever your bond counsel is at the time as to whether that project is eligible under the statute from that bucket of funds. And we'll be required to sort of opine as to whether it is or not.
Then is it your opinion that those items could be determined in advance of a project coming before you to be opined upon?
So I think Section 6 of the Site Coordination Agreement is our collective determination that those items, we have sort of thought about those in advance because you can identify them. They're contracted for. We sort of on the front end said those are eligible. We've not ruled out anything else.
So then this might be a Metro Legal question. So then as a body party to this deal, would we be able to help determine those definitions of what's necessary to the stadium opening and operating?
I'm not, I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of a way where it's ultimately a legal interpretation of that statute applied to the facts and circumstances of a particular project. And I don't know that, anybody's, sort of declaration of how they feel about it necessarily impacts that. Maybe it does, and I'm not thinking of it. But I think that's right. Have I said that right, Tom?
I agree with that, but I would also say that most of the projects that you're probably thinking about are going to have a public component to it. And it's got to be included in the CIB for any public capital project to be undertaken.
Sure, Tom, but to that end, then could you say, okay, it's in the CIB, but it's not a GO bond that's issued, or it's not a GO bond that's fully issued for it, per se. It might be, or maybe it's an operating expense, right, that these area sales tax revenues could go toward, and I'm just hypothetical here, but one that I think could be considered necessary to the stadium opening is some kind of extended or expanded transit, right? Like whether that's for service to the stadium on event days or whatever it might be. Would that be something that could be where you say this is necessary for the operation of the stadium given the existing infrastructure, to say these revenues could be determined for that. And the follow-up to that is, can we determine that now versus in a hypothetical future proposal?
I don't think there's any reason for us to have to come to that conclusion now.
But this body might say that we would like to do that. So
we've not discussed that and aren't in a position tonight to offer a conclusion about that.
That's fine. I think I'm just trying to introduce but expound upon the idea of what is infrastructure necessary to the opening and operation of the stadium. Because, if you take this further and you say, okay, there's not, the infrastructure includes like who's operating, right? Like it includes the people who are operating. And so to me, if we don't have sort of clear definitions, aside from what you're talking about, the street and the park and the parking, and we're saying, well, what is necessary to operate the stadium? It's necessary to have a certain level of staffing. That staffing has to be able to live somewhere. That staffing has to have a way to get here. How do we help determine that? Because ultimately, I think there are impacts that we talk about that could be infrastructure impacts, and I don't want to get down the road, because we have talked tonight a little bit about, is this going to sap from one bucket or another, right? A sidewalk project, another capital spending plan project, operating funds that could have gone somewhere like affordable housing or transit funding. And the concern about these backstops, but if we determine that, hey, actually there are costs to this, right? There are costs of people commuting, there are costs of people needing to be able to live close to where they work. How are we helping to determine that, to say, actually, we feel like if we are above and beyond and have those excess sales tax revenues, we can work toward resolving some of those issues with those revenue flows. That's my point. Is I hate to be like, what is infrastructure? But I think it is a question worth asking when it comes to this.
Are you done?
I feel like I don't have an answer, but I don't know if.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was kind of a question.
Yeah, sorry, Councilman. I don't know that this is going to be a satisfying answer, but we're totally open to the conversation about trying to put some more guardrails around what infrastructure is. There is a judgment call that you'll have to make if you want to engage in the conversation on whether you want to be inclusive or exclusive of the language, right? Right now, I think within reason, pretty much everything you said would be probably included. And so the question is, do you want to limit, something that we haven't thought of down the road, or leave it open-ended as we have and interpret as it comes up? I believe it would just be approved on a project-by-project basis. And yeah, right. And the one thing I was going to flag, I think the one thing the state statute would have a problem with is operating expenses. That probably gets a little bit in the gray area, or across the red. Nope, never mind. Not in the gray area. Across the red line. Right. But so, pretty much everything else.
So language that says something to the effect of including but not limited to, so that we're articulating but not excluding, could be amenable.
We made the decision not to limit ourselves at all, but if you wanted to add some language on examples and then saying keeping the language that doesn't limit it, we could go back and forth on red lines if you'd like with Mike. But
okay,
I think we've achieved what I'm saying. I think we've achieved what you were saying. But if you want to talk about the language,
I get it. I don't know that we're totally at odds on that. I think articulation. It's a values articulation, I think, is what I'm getting at. And to say that it's an acknowledgement of, hey, these pieces could be vital to the operation, and we want to make sure that they're spelled out. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Last on the list, Councilmember Mendez, and then we're going to take 5. He has nothing left, so that's great. So I'm sorry. Councilmember Withers would like to talk. So Councilmember Withers, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on any of these committees somehow. But I just wanted to address just a couple of, this has been a fantastic discussion. I really want to thank my colleagues for bringing all these great questions, as well as submitting so many things through the Q&A process. I think this body has been very diligent. I know it's unfortunate that this presentation was originally scheduled for last Monday. Tragic events happen, and we're just here today. But this has been a great discussion, and I want to thank everyone for coming out. In terms of the East Bank itself, just as a history lesson, the East Bank planning study started in about the first year of that discussion, assumed that the stadium would remain in its current location. Then some things changed. We had an opportunity to have an A or B situation where you would potentially relocate the stadium and do other things with that land where the stadium currently sits. So that has had a lot of public input, but nevertheless, we're sort of at the point where determining what infrastructure is needed in that stadium campus area, folks are really waiting on us to make a decision. So I just want to say that, like, it's difficult to design streets or even the path of East Bank Boulevard or some of those other things until we actually make a decision, as well as the Sports Authority. So some of those things are a little bit unknown because folks are waiting on us, and then additional diligence can happen. So that's one factor of it. My understanding, and I wish I could find it somewhere, but in looking through kind of the phasing of some of the infrastructure in particular for the East Bank, it sort of works actually kind of from the north, from the Oracle side, and kind of works its way down, assuming that you would have stadium construction going on. So some of the stuff that's a little bit closer to the stadium, but maybe not right in the campus village, is a little bit later in phases. So that would probably happen maybe 2027-ish. So we would not be talking about a capital spending plan this term, but probably, I mean, not even the next term, but the one after that, before that would really be presented. There would still be a lot of time to discuss a lot of that. Council member Sledge has brought fantastic discussion about transit. Transit has always been at the center of the East Bank Vision Plan. One of the things that is literally at the center of the East Bank is the East Bank Mobility Hub, and that East Bank Mobility Hub is on a parking lot that is one of the least encumbered, I guess I would say. So that is a project that can actually start very soon. Earlier in our discussions with WeGo and with that board, with Planning Director Kemp and Director Steve Bland, is a desire to build a mobility hub that serves not only WeGo buses, but also the bike lanes that we're actually going to get started designing soon on Woodland Street. So we have bike infrastructure, bus infrastructure. We could potentially include things like bike showers and lockers, some of the things that we all really want to see, we haven't seen yet in Nashville. And then also, one of the things that I've been very passionate about as the outgoing East Nashville council member, and possibly the last District 6 East Nashville council member, is that one of the things I've been really passionate about is not just affordable housing, but also putting in permanent supportive housing. We need more of that. And so one of the things that we've had some preliminary discussions about with that is, could we potentially incorporate that affordable and permanent supportive housing into the East Nashville Mobility Plan, so that not only do we have good transit options and multimodal options, but we actually also literally provide affordable housing and wraparound services right there on that site that we can control very quickly. Some of that's a little bit out of the wheelhouse of WeGo. I mean, like, honestly, some of it very much is, some is not. But those are all things that we have. What we've discussed is working through the kind of RFQ process to work with developers that have some of that experience to help us build it. But my assumption is, in terms of actual operation of the bus lines, that would still be a WeGo operating bus discussion. And so we could talk about how we finance the actual building, but obviously operation of the WeGo buses would depend upon whatever the operating budget we give to WeGo. So an excellent discussion. I really appreciate Councilmember Sledge for bringing that up, but just wanted to kind of get that back into the room as to how all those things would get worked out over a period of 4 to 7 years, I guess I would say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Witherspoon. Councilmember Mendez had one last thing.
Thanks. I was thinking that was going to have absolutely nothing to do with financing, and I wasn't going to comment. But then one part of it did have something to do with financing. I want to make sure everybody understands clearly. Whenever we hear things like, I want to make sure it has affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, because that would be a really important thing for the East Bank, like, understand that the unknown infrastructure cost for the East Bank climbs dollar for dollar for every time we say and commit to something like that, because no developer, there's a direct relationship between what a developer is going to build in terms of infrastructure and what we make them do that's non-revenue producing. So we may well decide to put permanent supportive housing immediately next to a 100 and whatever night per year, 60,000 person stadium, but like, know that directly impacts the currently unknown cost of infrastructure. And I just want to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendes. Okay, 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and take the first two bills up. Are going to be the stadium bills. Thank you, Director Flannery, for everything and everybody that came and presented. We really, really do appreciate it and all the information you provided. So thank you so much, and we're adjourned.